I still remember the smell of chalk dust. Even after all these years, it lingers in the cracks of the wooden floor, mixed with the faint scent of old paper and soap from the janitor's bucket that no one has used in decades. Sometimes, when the wind whistles through the broken windows, I swear I can hear the faint echoes of children laughing like ghosts trapped in their own joy. That laughter used to be my whole world. I wasn't always the old woman who lives in the school. Once, I was Mrs. Ellery, the teacher of room 3A. I taught handwriting, literature, and the small art of patience. I knew every child's dream, every fidget, every trembling hand that wanted to be seen. And when the bell rang at 3 o'clock, the corridor would fill with running feet, and I would stand by the door, smiling, waving, reminding them to tuck their scarves before going home now. The bell is silent. It's strange how silence can be louder than any sound. It presses against your chest until breathing feels like effort. After the town closed the school, they tore down most of the newer buildings. But this one, the old brick wing, was too stubborn to fall apart. Like me, so I stayed. I told myself it was temporary, just until I found something else, some small apartment or shelter. But years passed, and no one came to claim the desks or the books. No one remembered the woman who stayed behind to watch the ghosts. So, I made the school my home. I sleep in the old teacher's lounge. There's a small stove there, and if I burn enough of the fallen branches from the yard, it keeps me warm through most nights. My bed is an old couch covered with quilts I've sewn from forgotten curtains. The cupboards still hold mugs with children's names written in faded marker. Tommy, Lisa, Sarah. I talk to them sometimes, just to hear a voice in the room. You might think that's madness. Maybe it is. But madness, I've learned, is simply love with nowhere to go. Every morning, I walk through the halls. My steps echo like tiny thunderclaps on the wooden floors. I brush the dust from the blackboards, rearrange the chairs, and open the windows even when it's cold, to let the ghosts breathe. I say to myself, outside, the world moved on. The town shrank after the mine closed. People sold their homes and left. My son Daniel left too. He promised to come back once he figured things out. That was 15 years ago. At first, he sent letters, then fewer, then none. The postman stopped coming altogether. I still remember the last letter he sent. I keep it folded in my apron pocket. Even now, the paper has turned soft from my fingers. The ink has blurred in spots where I cried over it. Mama, don't worry. I'll send for you soon. There's work in the city. Once I settle, you won't have to stay in that cold place anymore. He called it that cold place. Funny, isn't it? To me, this school was always warmth. Even now, when snow creeps through the cracks in the windows and frost bites at my fingertips, I still feel the faint warmth of the children's laughter in the walls. That's what keeps me here. Not the bricks, not the memories, the laughter, the echoes of life that refused to die. Last night, the wind was wild. It howled through the corridors like a living thing, slamming doors and rattling windows. I wrapped myself in 3 blankets, sat by the stove, and watched the flame flicker. Sometimes, I think of the fire as a friend, a small, loyal heart that beats beside mine. When I close my eyes, I can almost hear my granddaughter's giggle. She was 3 the last time I saw her. She had curls like spun honey and eyes like her father's, Daniel's eyes. She would sit on my lap and scribble on paper with crayons, declaring that she was writing stories like grandma's students. Maybe she writes them still. Maybe she's grown now, with her own stories and her own reasons not to come back. I don't blame them. When people move on, they have to build their new lives on clean ground. And I am the old soil, heavy with roots. Every afternoon, as the sun slips through the cracked glass, I go outside and sweep the snow from the front steps. It's foolish. I know no one visits, but I do it anyway. The act of clearing space feels like prayer. Sometimes birds come, little sparrows that nest near the flagpole. I scatter crumbs for them. They hopped closer, unafraid. Maybe they, too, have learned that I'm harmless. There's peace in solitude, yes, but there's also a quiet ache, like a song you half remember but can't finish humming. One day, about a week ago, I heard something strange, the sound of wheels crunching over the frozen ground. My heart leaped. I hurried to the window, brushing the frost aside, but it was only a truck passing by on the distant road, carrying logs. Still, that night, I dreamed of footsteps in the hall. In the dream, someone was calling my name softly, like when Daniel was a boy and afraid of the dark. Mama, are you here? I woke up crying. When morning came, I walked through every classroom. Dust lay thick on the desks, but sunlight made it almost beautiful, like snow turned to gold. I paused in room 3A, my old class. and stood by the chalkboard. There was still a faint line of writing there, half erased by time. Be kind, always. I smiled. That was mine. The last lesson I ever wrote before the school closed. I traced the words with my fingers, and something inside me trembled as if I'd just spoken to my younger self, the one who still believed kindness could fix everything. If I close my eyes, I can see them all again. Sarah with her red braids, Tommy with his broken glasses, little Mark who couldn't spell Wednesday to save his life. I can even smell the soap my husband used when he came to pick me up after work. He's been gone 22 years now, buried by the oak tree near the river. Sometimes, I sit by that grave and tell him everything about the birds, the snow, the dreams, about how I'm still waiting. People in town used to whisper about me. She's that widow who never left the school. Poor thing, lost her mind. They said it with pity at first, then with annoyance, then they stopped talking about me altogether. And I stopped expecting anyone to understand. Loneliness becomes a rhythm after a while. You start to measure time not by days, but by how many times the kettle whistles before the fire dies down. You learn the exact sound of your own heartbeat in an empty room. You make peace with the way shadows stretch across the floor at dusk, as if even light wants to leave early. That's what my life became, a quiet, slow fading dot, until that night. It was the coldest winter I can remember, the kind where the air itself feels sharp, like it's cutting through your lungs when you breathe. I had run out of firewood 2 days before. My hands were so numb I could barely thread the needle to patch my blanket. Snow had piled against the door. The wind screamed through the cracks in the ceiling. I thought maybe this was how it would end, quietly, in the same place where my life had once been full of voices. I wasn't afraid. Not really, just tired. I wrapped myself in my thickest shawl and sat by the window. The sky was a bruised gray, the kind that promises more snow. I whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for peace. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. 3 slow knocks. I froze. The sound came again, firm, deliberate. Someone was knocking on the front door of the school. No one had knocked on that door in 15 years. For a moment, I thought it might be a trick of the wind, an old door shifting in the cold. But then I heard it again. Closer, more insistent. 3 knocks. Then silence. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it echo down the corridor. I grabbed my shawl tighter and shuffled toward the entrance. The hallway felt longer than ever, the air colder, the shadows deeper. My footsteps echoed slow, hesitant, like the steps of someone walking back into her own past. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle. What if it was no one? Or worse, what if it was someone who shouldn't be there? But then, from the other side, came a voice. Soft. Familiar. Grandma. I gasped. No. It couldn't be. Grandma, are you there? My knees nearly gave out. I pressed my palm against the wood, feeling the tremor in my bones. It's me, the voice said again, trembling. Please, open the door. For a moment, I couldn't move. My whole body felt frozen, as if the world had stopped turning. But my heart burned like the stove's flame, suddenly roaring back to life, and then I turned the handle. The door creaked open into the winter night, and standing there, covered in snow and tears, was the last face I ever expected to see again. For a heartbeat, I thought I was dreaming. Snowflakes clung to her lashes like small stars. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her coat, much too thin for a night like that, was soaked through. The wind howled behind her, scattering white powder into the entrance hall. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. It was her. Grandma, she whispered again, voice trembling, lips blue from the frost. It's really you. For so many years, I had imagined that moment, how I would fall to my knees, how I would embrace her, how I would weep until all the lost time dissolved. But now that she was here, flesh and breath and tears, I could do nothing but stare. I hadn't seen Clara since she was 3 years old. 15 winters had passed since I'd last brushed her hair or kissed her goodnight. In my mind, she had always remained a small child, the one who drew crooked hearts on paper and called them letters for Grandma. Now she stood before me as a woman, her eyes the same hazel as her father's. Daniel. My Daniel, the name pulsed in my chest like a bruise.
I wanted to ask where he was, what had happened, why she was here. But the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I reached out. My fingers brushed her sleeve, icy cold to the touch. "You're freezing," I murmured. "Come inside, child, quickly." She stepped forward, and for the first time in 15 years, Someone crossed the threshold of that old school. The wind slammed the door shut behind her with a heavy thud. The hall fell silent again, except for the faint crackle of the dying fire in my stove down the corridor. Clara looked around, her eyes wide. "You still live here?" Her voice was soft but tinged with disbelief. She looked at the cracked walls, the faded bulletin board still covered in brittle yellow papers. Science Fair 1998. Winter Recital. Her hand reached out and brushed one. "It's like time stopped." I smiled faintly. "In some places it does." She turned back to me, her face half lit by the flickering light from the stove down the hall. "I didn't think you'd still be here," Dad said. Her voice faltered. "What did your father say?" She looked down. "He said you left, that you didn't want to be found." The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, the air went out of the room. "I didn't leave," I said quietly. I waited. We moved toward the old lounge where the fire still glowed faintly. She followed me, her boots leaving wet prints on the dusty floor. I added more wood to the stove, coaxing the flames back to life. The light flickered across her face, illuminating the small tremor in her hands. "Sit," I said gently, pointing to the couch. "You need to warm up." She hesitated, then sank into the old cushions. Steam rose from her coat as the heat began to thaw the snow clinging to it. I poured her tea from the kettle, weak but hot. She took it in both hands and held it close to her lips, inhaling the steam like it was the sweetest perfume. "Thank you," she whispered. I sat across from her, studying her face. So many questions, and yet I was afraid to ask even one. Finally, I said softly, "Why now, Clara?" Her eyes flickered. "Because he's gone, Grandma." The room seemed to tilt. "Gone?" She nodded, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. "Dad died 2 months ago." For a long while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled. I stared into the flames, seeing Daniel's face in every flicker. He had been so young when his father died, so angry at the world. And then he had turned that anger toward me, the mother who had nothing left to give. "How?" I whispered. "Heart," she said simply. "They said it was quick." "I wasn't there." I closed my eyes. My chest ached. Not just from grief, but from the hollow truth that I would never see him walk through that door again. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a breath. He promised he'd come back. Clara looked at me, and for the first time I saw it. Guilt. Heavy, quiet guilt in her young eyes. "I didn't know the truth," she said, her words trembling. "He told me you didn't want to see us. That you were tired of being reminded of Grandpa's death. That you moved away." Her voice cracked. I believed him. I stared at her, the old wound reopening. "He said that?" She nodded. "I didn't know you were still here. I thought you'd died too." I stood and turned toward the window. Snow was falling thickly now, each flake glowing orange in the reflection of the firelight. For years I had built my days around the possibility that one of them might return. Every sound, every passing car, every bird landing near the window. I'd think, maybe this time. But Daniel never came, and now I understood why. Grief does strange things to people. It twists truth into something easier to live with. Maybe he couldn't bear to see the old school again, the place where I had once been alive with purpose. Maybe it reminded him too much of what we lost. Still, a lie, even told out of pain, builds walls that love cannot climb. I turned back to her. She was staring into the fire, tears still wet on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have come sooner. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout, 'Why didn't you?' But when I looked at her, truly looked, I saw the same lost child who once fell asleep in my arms during a thunderstorm. I couldn't hate her. So I sat beside her instead and took her cold hand in mine. "You came now," I said softly. That's what matters. For a long time, we just sat there, two survivors of the same silence. The fire crackled, the storm raged outside, and the old school seemed to breathe again around us. It had waited too, just like me. Finally, she spoke. I found your name on an old envelope. An envelope? In Dad's desk, she said. After the funeral, it was a letter addressed to you, but he never sent it. My breath caught. What did it say? She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed at the edges. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Neat, slanted, careful. Read it, I whispered. She unfolded it, her hands trembling. Mama, I don't know how to face you after everything. The city didn't turn out like I planned. I told Clara you didn't want to come because I couldn't bear her to see how much I failed. I lost the job, the apartment, everything. I couldn't let her know how small I'd become. You raised me to stand tall, and I broke that. I'll make it right, I promise. When I do, I'll come for you. Until then, forgive me. Daniel. The words blurred before my eyes. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't hated me. He had only been ashamed. I pressed the letter to my chest, and for the first time in years, the tears came freely. They weren't bitter this time. They were soft, trembling tears of release. Clara touched my shoulder. He wanted to make it right. I know, I whispered. He just ran out of time. We sat together until the fire burned low. Outside, the storm began to calm, and a pale moon glowed behind the drifting clouds. Where will you go now? I asked quietly. She hesitated. I don't know. I just drove. I didn't plan anything. When I reached the old road and saw the school's roof through the trees, something told me to stop. I didn't even think you'd be here. I smiled faintly. You followed the same instinct that brought your father here once. The one that led him home every time he got lost. Her eyes met mine. Maybe I found it again tonight. The fire had nearly died when I stood and fetched another blanket. I laid it over her shoulders. She was exhausted, her eyes drooping from the heat and the weight of too many miles. You can stay here tonight, I said. The roof still holds mostly. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She smiled faintly, the same lopsided smile Daniel had when he was young, and whispered, Good night, Grandma. I watched her curl up on the couch, her breathing slow and even. The firelight danced across her face. For the first time in years, the room didn't feel empty. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow from the stove. I sat in my old rocking chair by the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard where children once played. The silence felt different now, not hollow but full, like a held breath waiting to exhale. I whispered into the night as if my son could still hear me. She's home, Daniel. She found her way back, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice, carried on the wind, warm and distant. Thank you, Mama. I woke to the sound of birds. It startled me at first, that delicate, hopeful sound after so many winters of nothing but wind and creaking wood. I lay there on the couch, my old blanket around my shoulders, and for a moment I couldn't remember what had changed. Then I heard the faint rustle of movement in the next room. Clara. The memories rushed back like a tide. The knock, the tears, the fire, the letter, the long-lost face I thought I would never see again. For the first time in years, the school smelled of warmth, damp wool, boiling water, and life. I rose slowly, my bones stiff from the cold and from age. Through the cracked door, I saw her standing by the stove, trying to light it. Her hair was tied back with a string, and her hands, young but trembling, struggled with the match. Careful, I said softly. She turned, startled, then smiled. Good morning, Grandma. That word, Grandma, still felt new, like a forgotten song suddenly remembered. I hadn't heard it spoken in 15 years, and it wrapped around me like sunlight. "Good morning, my dear," I said, joining her. "Here, let me." She stepped aside and watched as I struck the match the old way, cupping it with my palm, feeding the small flame into the kindling until it caught. Soon, orange light flickered once more inside the stove. "You make it look easy," she said. "Everything looks easy when you've done it 1,000 times," I replied with a smile. "It's only practice and patience." She nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Dad used to say that too." My heart twisted, but gently this time, like an ache learning to heal. We sat together at the small table, sipping the weak tea I had left from the night before. The morning light came through the frost-rimmed windows, soft and gold, painting her face in a way that made her look both grown and heartbreakingly young. "Did you sleep well?" I asked. "I think so," she said. "I had dreams. The kind you wake from and can't tell if they were memories." "What did you dream?" She hesitated. "A bell ringing, kids running down the hallway, and someone calling my name. Your voice, maybe. I was holding a paper star." I smiled. "You made those once?" "For the Christmas pageant. You insisted that every child should have one. Even the janitor." Her eyes lit up. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." And I did. Every smile, every laugh, every paper star she'd glued with clumsy little fingers before the stage lights flickered and the parents clapped. That memory had stayed buried in me all these years, like an ember that never went out. After breakfast, I walked her through the halls. Dust motes drifted in the air like tiny ghosts, and our footsteps echoed against the old wooden boards. "Did you ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly as we passed the rows of broken desks. "Many times," I said. "But every time I packed, I heard the echoes, the children, the laughter. I thought if I left, no one would remember this place. And maybe no one would remember me." She nodded slowly. "You were still teaching in a way, even without students." "I suppose I was." We reached room 3A. I paused at the doorway, the old brass plaque still clinging to the frame, tarnished and green. "This was my classroom," I said. She stepped inside and gasped softly. "It's beautiful, even now." The sunlight poured across the floor, catching the dust in a golden haze. The chalkboard stood crooked, covered in faded writing. In the corner, a stack of old notebooks leaned like tired soldiers. Clara walked to one of the desks and touched its surface. "There are initials carved here," I smiled. "Children leave their marks wherever they go." She traced the letters with her fingers. "TD plus EF, forever." "They were inseparable," I said, "until she moved away." Clara grinned faintly. "I wonder if they found each other again." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they remember each other every time they see snow." We moved through the room slowly, almost reverently. I opened one of the old cupboards and a flurry of papers fell out. Lesson plans, spelling tests, drawings of stick figure families. She crouched to pick one up, her expression soft. "This one's yours," I said. She blinked. "Mine?" I took it from her hands. The paper was yellowed but intact. A child's drawing of a woman with a bun and glasses, standing in front of a blackboard. At the bottom, written in uneven letters, "My grandma is the best teacher." Her breath hitched. "I drew this?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "I don't remember making it." "You were 3. You wanted to be like me. You'd sit by the blackboard pretending to grade papers." She smiled through her tears. "And you let me." "Of course I did," I said. "That's what love is. Letting someone believe they can do anything." For a long time, we just stood there in that classroom full of ghosts. The sunlight warmed the walls, and I realized something I hadn't felt in decades. Joy. Not the loud, overflowing kind, but the quiet joy of being remembered. When we left the room, I felt lighter, as though the years had lifted from my shoulders. We walked down the hallway lined with faded photographs. Old classes, teachers, smiling faces. Clara stopped at one and pointed. "Is that Dad?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Second row, fifth from the left." The boy with the serious face and crooked tie. "He looked so proud." "He was," I said softly. "That was the day he won the spelling bee. He could barely hold the certificate without shaking." She laughed. "He never told me that." "He didn't tell you a lot of things, I imagine." Her expression turned pensive. "He carried so much. I think he wanted to protect me from the past." "Sometimes love looks like silence," I said. "But silence can hurt just as deeply as words." Later that day we explored the basement, something I hadn't done in years. The air down there was heavy and cold, thick with the smell of damp and dust. "Are you sure it's safe?" Clara asked, holding the lantern I had given her. "As safe as memory can be," I said. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing. Cobwebs draped the corners like forgotten curtains. Boxes were piled against the walls. Records, old books, things no one thought worth taking when the school closed. I pulled one open, brushing aside the dust. Inside were folders with names written in neat cursive. Attendance sheets, grades, permission slips. Then near the bottom, I found something wrapped in oilcloth. "What's that?" she asked. "I don't know." We unwrapped it together. Inside was a wooden box, carved with initials. E.E., my husband's. My hands began to tremble. "I thought I'd lost this," I whispered. I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, neatly folded, bound with a ribbon, and beneath them a small brass key. Clara looked at me. "Grandpa's?" "Yes," I said. "He was the custodian here. Before he passed, he told me there was something he wanted me to find someday. But I never knew where to look," she smiled softly. "Looks like he hid it for both of us." We sat on an old crate as I opened the first letter. The paper was fragile, the handwriting elegant. His, "My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, it means time has stolen what I could not say aloud. This school was our life, our love, and our legacy. You built it with your lessons, I with my hands. But I know one day you'll be alone here, and I can't bear the thought of you thinking the world forgot. There's something upstairs, in the attic above room 3A. Use the brass key. What you find there is not treasure, but truth." My hands shook. The attic? I hadn't been there since before he died. The door had always been locked. I thought the key lost. Clara's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Let's go." "Now?" "Why wait?" We climbed the narrow staircase behind the old janitor's closet. Each step groaned beneath our weight. At the top was a small wooden door, one I had walked past countless times without thinking. I slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside, dust filled the air like fog. The attic smelled of cedar and memory. In the corner, under a sheet, stood an easel and several old boxes. Clara pulled the sheet aside, revealing a painting, unfinished but unmistakable. It was me, standing before the blackboard, surrounded by children. "He painted you," she whispered. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. "He used to sketch after work. But I never saw this." The brushstrokes were tender, imperfect. My younger self smiled from the canvas, her eyes bright, alive. Beneath the painting lay a notebook bound in leather. I opened it carefully. Inside were pages filled with letters, not to me, but to our son. "Daniel, if you ever forget who you are, remember this. You are made of two teachers, one who taught with chalk, the other with hands. Don't run from where you came from. There's no shame in roots." My breath caught. Clara whispered, "He never read these, did he?" "No," I said softly. "They stayed here all along." We spent hours up there, reading his words, touching his world. It was as though the house itself had opened its heart, revealing all the things left unsaid between us. When we finally descended, the sun was setting, the snow outside glowing pink. Clara turned to me at the doorway of room 3A. "You know, Grandma, maybe he meant for us to find it. Together." "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly. "Maybe he knew we'd need each other to understand it." She looked around the hall, her gaze soft. "It feels different now, like the school's alive again." "Because it is," I said. "You brought life back with you." That night, as we sat by the fire again, I told her stories. Of her father as a boy, of her grandfather's jokes, of the children who once filled these halls. She listened with her chin on her knees, eyes glowing in the firelight. At one point she said quietly, "I used to think love was something you earned, but being here, it feels like it's something that just waits for you, even when you leave it behind." I reached over and touched her hand. "Love doesn't vanish, Clara. It just waits. In letters, in places, in people," she smiled. "Then this school must be the most patient place in the world." I laughed softly. "It's had good company." That night, when she fell asleep again on the couch, I sat watching the fire, the brass key still in my hand. So many years I had waited for something to change, for someone to knock, for time to give back what it had taken. And now that it had, I realized something simple and profound. The door had never truly been locked. It was me who had stopped trying to open it. By dawn, the storm had laid itself down like a tired animal at our doorstep. The world outside glowed blue and white. Soft as breath, the trees bowed under clean sheets of snow. Inside, the school felt warmer than it had in years, as if the old radiators had suddenly remembered their purpose. The stove ticked and sighed. Clara stirred on the couch, her hair a black river spilling over the quilt, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other still holding last night's letter from her father. I didn't wake her. I watched. There is a certain holiness to watching someone sleep, the way even grief loosens its grip for a little while. Light seeped through the cracks in the windows. Dust drifted like prayer. When she finally opened her eyes, she smiled without knowing she was smiling. "Morning," she whispered. "Morning, love," I said, as if this had always been our habit, as if we hadn't lost 15 winters. "Tea?" She nodded, and the small ordinary sound of the kettle lifting felt like a bell rung in a chapel. I poured. We held the cups to our mouths and let the steam kiss the parts of us the cold had taken. Neither of us mentioned that we had both cried in the night. Some griefs you don't name. You steep them until they're gentle enough to drink. We set out as the sun cleared the bare black branches. The snow was unbroken except for the track of a fox and our boot prints from the woodpile. I wrapped a scarf twice around my neck. Clara took the brass key from my palm and slipped it into her coat pocket, like a promise she could carry. "Are you sure?" she asked. "We can wait for the roads to clear." "We've waited long enough," I said. We crossed the yard, our breath making clouds. The flagpole chimed softly in the breeze. The school's bricks creaked in the gentle thaw. Old bones, warming. I locked the door out of habit, laughed at myself, and slipped the skeleton key back into its hook above the frame. Some gestures are muscle memory. They keep you human. At the end of the drive, the plow had passed, leaving a ridge we climbed like two girls. My cane sank and found the packed road. We started toward town. "Tell me something about him," I said as we walked. "Something I don't know." She thought a moment. "He whistled when he cooked," she said. "Terribly. He tried to copy the radio and always landed between notes. I told him he sounded like a kettle that didn't know how to boil. He said he was practicing how to be happy out loud." The image stung and warmed me at once. "He didn't whistle when he was a boy," I said. He hummed. "It drove his teacher crazy because he didn't know he was doing it." "Like the kettle," she said, smiling. "Like the kettle," I echoed. We walked past the frozen pond where the winter pageants had once been staged when the auditorium heater went out. I could still see the children reciting lines with scarves, wrapped up to their eyes, a chorus of steam from their mouths. I had called it realistic weather design, and the parents had laughed until their cheeks shone. At the bridge, we stopped to look down at the river, black under its skin of ice. "He brought me here on my birthday," Clara said softly. We threw sticks and watched them catch in the eddies. "He said the river is what time looks like, if you could see it. Always moving, even when you think it's still." "He learned that from your grandfather," I said, "though your grandfather would have said it while fixing a pipe with his hat on crooked." Her laugh cracked open the cold. I could have stood there forever just to hear it again. Town was smaller than she remembered, than I remembered, truth be told. Windows that used to brag about sales were now polite with for-lease signs. The diner still had the same bell on the door, the same faded pie menu painted on the wall. As we passed, heads turned. I felt the old prickle between my shoulder blades. The feeling of being seen by a memory you didn't give permission to speak. "Don't mind them," I said, mostly to myself. We stopped first at the post office. The counter was manned by a man I didn't know, and a calendar already 2 days behind. I asked for a single stamp and slid a blank postcard across the wood. To Daniel, I thought, absurdly, though I addressed it nowhere. I wrote nothing. I pressed it to my lips and put it in my pocket. Later, I would tuck it in the attic box beside his letters to the boy he had been. "Ready?" Clara asked. I nodded. The bank's brass handles were cold as icicles. Inside smelled of floor polish and the particular quiet of rooms that keep other people's secrets. A woman in a gray suit looked up with professional kindness that softened when she saw our faces. Grief recognizes its own. "How can I help you?" I took a breath. The words felt too big for my mouth. "I think there was a safe deposit box in my husband's name. Ellery." I spelled it, though my hands knew they didn't need to. He kept the key. "I found it?" Her glance flicked to the brass, shining in Clara's palm. "One moment," she said, and disappeared into the back. I listened to the clock. I could tell you the time by its tone. Patient, private, merciless. The woman returned with a ledger the color of old tea. She ran her finger down a page, paused, ran it back, then looked up. "There is a box," she said. "Registered to Edward Ellery." She swallowed. "There is also a second name authorized on the account. Daniel Ellery." Clara's breath trembled. "Authorized? Added 12 years ago," the woman said gently. "An extension fee was paid every year since." I blinked. "Every year?" She nodded. "Sometimes late, but always paid." "By whom?" Clara asked, though we both knew. The clerk's eyes softened further. "By a man with eyes that looked like his life had gone longer than his years." I gripped the counter. The world tilted the way it does when you stand too fast. He had been coming here. He had come home. Not to the school, not to me. Not to break the spell of shame, but to keep a promise with his name. "Would you like to open the box?" the woman asked. "I'll need both keys." We followed her into the vault, where the air tasted like coins and promises. She slid the column aside and found the small rectangle that held what a man keeps when he can't carry it anywhere else. Clara inserted the brass key. The clerk turned her own. The door opened with the clean hiss of a curtain pulled back. Inside, paper. So much paper. Elastic bands holding stacks of envelopes. Old passbooks. A tin that used to hold mints and now held something else that rattled. Clara looked at me. "Go on," I said. "We'll open together." We sat at the little table they keep for people who need to meet what they've missed. The clerk, to her credit, left us alone. The first stack was receipts. Messy, ordinary, holy. Deliveries to the school address. Cordwood, 1/4 cord. Paid cash. Kerosene, 1 can. Flour, 10 pounds. The sums were small and steady, like a heartbeat. Some were years ago, some last winter. A curl of handwriting at the bottom of several read, "Leave discreetly by rear door. For the caretaker." I touched the words and felt the floor fall away. "He was there," Clara whispered. "He was there, Grandma. He was feeding the stove from the shadows." I saw it suddenly, the mornings I'd found the bundle by the back step, and thought it was a kindness from a stranger or some quiet municipal mercy I didn't merit. I had said thank you to the sky. I had boiled the flour into bread. I had warmed my hands and called it an accident of grace. And it had been Daniel, braver and more cowardly than I could bear. "Oh, my boy," I said, and the words split themselves into tears. We opened the tin. Inside, folded and refolded, a photograph creased to a ghost of itself. Daniel at the river with a child on his shoulders. Clara, tiny, laughing, a sun halo of hair. On the back, his exacting hand. "I'm coming home when I learn the words to say it." Beneath the photograph lay a key on a blue tag, hand-lettered with an address. Not ours. The old hardware store, shuttered these last years. Underneath, a note on a ripped paper bag. Room 3A. It felt like a string pulled tight through time from his father, to him, to us. And we both held it, fists closed, as if it could tow us to shore. In the bottom of the box, wrapped in the kind of paper you use when you want something not to crack, was a folder stamped by a lawyer whose name I recognized from obituaries and bake sale donations. Inside, a deed, not new, old amended. The schoolhouse, the old wing only, had been quietly transferred from the district to a Friends of Trust, with a lifetime tenancy granted to Eliza Ann Ellery for as long as she wished to reside, and then to be held for educational and community purposes in perpetuity. The trust bore 3 signatures: the superintendent, a local judge, and my husband, Edward Ellery. My breath became a paper thing. "He made sure you couldn't be put out," Clara finished, reading with me, her finger underlining words as if they would otherwise slip away. "And look, there's a clause." She read aloud, shaky. "Upon the trustee's death, any child of Daniel Ellery may assume stewardship." She looked up, eyes a question and an answer at once. He thought of me. There was a letter clipped to the back. The paper was tissue thin, and the ink bled like a bruise. "To the one who opens this last, if you are Eliza, I have done for you what love lets me do with the time I have. If you are Daniel, I have given you a way to stand here again without asking forgiveness first. And if you are a grandchild with our stubborn blood, then you are the one I was counting on to choose between keeping this as a museum of ghosts, or setting a table here again for the living. The school does not need to be a school to teach. Keep it warm, keep it safe, keep it open." I didn't realize I had been holding my breath until my lungs burned. We read it again, slower, letting each sentence sit in us like bread. "Keep it open," Clara said, almost to herself. I nodded. He always believed doors should swing both ways. We took everything and packed it back like a picnic we would finish at home. The clerk was waiting with the tact of a nurse in a room where a baby has been born after a long labor. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said, and discovered that sometimes yes means we're not the same people we were an hour ago. Outside, the air had a new edge of melt. We followed the sidewalk to the old hardware store, the one with the painted name still perched above the plate glass, like a relic, Merrill's. The windows were clouded with dust. The lock was newish. New compared to the door, anyway. And the blue tag key slid in like it had been waiting for this exact day. Inside smelled like oil and wood and childhood Saturdays. Rows of empty pegboards stood like ribs. In the back, a room. The office, I remembered, with a lamp plugged into an extension cord snaked from somewhere that still had power. Beneath the lamp, a small stack of boxes. And on top, an envelope with my name. Eliza printed in Daniel's block letters taught by a woman who insisted on clarity. I opened it. Inside, a ledger. Not money, not exactly, but numbers that behaved like it. Donations accounted in tremulous deposits over a decade. 20 here, 50 there, 300 on a birthday with a note for heat. Names that made me bite my lip. The waitress from the diner who used to refill my coffee without asking. The retired coach who never forgot to send a card on Founder's Day. Anonymous gifts marked simply from room 3A. Clara pressed her fingers to her mouth. He made a circle, she said. He couldn't come home, but he sent home around you. There were notes tucked between the pages. Mrs. E likes oatmeal. Ask Gert. Leave scarf. She won't take it if she thinks it's charity. Leave like weather. Tell Clara her paper stars are in the attic. There was even a crude drawing of the stove's flue with a question mark and an arrow that made me laugh through tears because only my son would be ashamed and still fussy about ventilation. In the bottom box, under a roll of twine, a hand-painted sign. The brush strokes were clumsy. The words were steady. The room with a light on. Grandma, Clara whispered, do you think he meant? Yes, I said. I think he wanted people to know they could come. We stood there, 2 women in a place the town had forgotten to remember, holding a sign that felt like a doorbell. Outside, a car slushed past. A dog barked with the entitlement of a creature who has never doubted its welcome. I felt the years tilt toward us, not away. Let's go home, I said, and meant the school. On the way back, we stopped at the diner. It was not bravery. It was appetite and the courage that sometimes rides on the back of hunger. The bell clanged. Heads turned again, and this time I met the eyes that met mine. Some flinched from the story on my face. Some softened. The waitress, Gert, the same as in the ledger, came with coffee already moving from pot to cup. You look like you could eat the snow, she said. We found a letter, I told her, absurdly, as if we were acquaintances catching up about weather. He'd been here all this time. She set the cups down, put her hand on mine. Honey, she said, we knew, some of us. He made us promise not to tell you until he could. We kept a bad promise for what felt like a good reason. I'm sorry. There was no anger left in me, only the now familiar mixture of ache and gratitude. Thank you for keeping the stove fed, I said. Her eyes glossed. Wasn't just him. Wasn't just me. It was the room with a light on. It made us better. Clara looked at the pies in the cooler like they were stained glass windows. 2 slices of whatever tastes like a second chance, she said. Gert grinned. Apple crumb with too much topping, coming right up. We ate, and the sugar steadied us, and on a napkin we wrote the words that would be a plan when our hands stopped shaking. Fix flue. Sweep chimney. Seal windows. Announce open nights when it's below freezing. Bread on Fridays. Reading on Sundays. Tea always. Clara drew a star next to reading, and then, without looking at me, added story hour with Grandma Eliza. I set my cup down so I could press my palm to the napkin and feel the ink where the future had dampened it. Back at the school, we went first to the attic. The painting waited with its unfinished children, and I felt bold enough to look myself in the face on that canvas and not turn away. We tucked the bank papers into the wooden box. We added the blank postcard. We placed the sign, the room with a light, on against the easel so the words would be the first thing anyone saw if the door were ever opened by someone else long after us. We came downstairs with our arms full of the small things that make a plan real. Nails, the good hammer, the better broom, the desire to be tired for a decent reason. We worked until the light slipped to the floor, and when we lit the stove, the flame rose with a confidence that felt like yes. Clara stood by the blackboard in room 3A and picked up a stick of chalk that had sat so long it seemed petrified into stone. It took the black as if starving, and in a careful hand she wrote, "Be kind, always, and keep the light on." She stepped back and looked at me. For the people who need a room that doesn't ask questions first. For the ones who come late because shame has bad timing, I added. For Dad, she said. For your grandfather, I said. For us, we said together. And there it was, the prayer. We hung the sign inside the glass of the front door. We swept the steps even though snow kept falling. We dragged a bench to the entry and piled blankets. We filled a tin with tea leaves that tasted like hope. We set one mug on the sill and left it empty, the way you set a place for someone who may yet come. And then we stood in the corridor where once the day used to begin, with a bell, and listened to the quiet hum of a building that had decided to become a heart again. Night came early, as winter insists. In the lounge, I wrapped an extra quilt around Clara's shoulders and fussed at the way she folded her legs, the way mothers and teachers do when love needs something to occupy its hands. She rolled her eyes exactly like her father, and I told her so, until we both laughed the kind of laugh that's a bridge built quickly over a ravine. The wind rose and then quieted like a thought that gives up. I dozed in my chair. Somewhere around the hour when sorrow tries to collect old debts, I woke because the cold was different. Not colder exactly, but sharper, like a new edge has been given to a familiar blade. Then I heard it. A scuff on the step, a pause, another scuff, the soft caution of someone who has learned to apologize to floors. Clara sat up, eyes wide. She heard it too. I didn't say anything. I stood. I took the lantern. We went to the front together. At the door, I could see the shape through the glass. Shoulders bent under a coat that had remembered too many winters. A knit cap pulled down to the eyebrows. Hands bare and red. The person stood there in that particular kind of stillness that belongs to people who have been turned away often enough to rehearse the refusal before it arrives. I looked at Clara. She looked at me. She nodded. I opened the door. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady the way I made it for first days of school and last chances. "You're right on time." The figure blinked, startled by the grammar of welcome. I saw the light," they said, voice rough with cold, and a life spent outside of warmth. "Then you saw the sign," Clara said gently. "Come in." They didn't move at first, as if their feet had grown roots of fear into the threshold, so I stepped aside and made a small sweeping motion with my hand. The same I used to make for children late to class, for parents ashamed, for anyone who needed a place that didn't keep score. "Tea's on," I said, "and there's a chair with your name." They came in. Behind them, the night took one step back, and the school took one step forward. And in between those two movements, I felt the click of a key I hadn't known I was still turning in a lock that had always been inside my chest. We poured tea. We laid logs. We found dry socks from the bin that had started with a stubborn boy's idea of redemption and had become a town's habit of kindness. The stranger wrapped hands around heat with the reverence of prayer. "What is this place?" they asked finally, not looking up, as if to look would make it vanish. "A school," I said. "And when the nights are like this, a room with a light on." They nodded as if cataloguing the new physics. "You can sleep," Clara said. "No forms, no questions. Just be very good to yourself and to the blankets." A tear slipped without permission down their cheek. "Bless you," they said. "Bless us all," I answered, and meant the living and the dead in the same breath. Later, when the stranger's breathing had slowed and the stove glowed like an embered planet, Clara and I stood in the hall with our heads close, like conspirators and choir girls. "We did it," she whispered. "We started," I corrected, and felt how right that word was. I thought of my husband, of his hands blackened by coal and chalk dust, of the letters he wrote to a boy who could not yet hear them. I thought of my son, whistling off key in a kitchen that bent each note into mercy. I thought of the ledger of small gifts, and how it had made a table sturdy enough to set tea without wobble. I thought of all the invisible roads people take to arrive, where love is waiting unpunished. I thought, finally, of the sentence on the board in room 3A and how I had written it as a teacher and would now spend whatever time I had left proving it as a woman. Be kind, always, and keep the light on. When we returned to the lounge, I pressed my hand to the wall. It was warmer than it had been in years, and I told myself that some of that heat would travel through the bricks, down the corridor, up the stair, and into the attic where a painting waited half-finished for children who had come back at last by another name. Outside, the snow began again, softer now, as if to bless rather than bury. Inside, the school exhaled like a body that has decided not to die. And in that breath, I heard them both, one after the other, in the braided voice of men who loved me imperfectly, but with everything they had. Keep it open. We will, I said aloud, to the sleeping stranger, to my granddaughter, to the rafters, to the ledger, to the signed deed that had thought of me when I didn't know to think of myself, to the river that looked like time when you could see it. We will. The snow came heavy that week, folding the whole valley into silence again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the soft hush of something sacred being rebuilt. From the outside, the old school still looked like ruin. Paint peeling, windows clouded, roof lines stooped with age. But inside, the air had changed. Every breath felt shared, like we'd coaxed the walls to remember what warmth meant. The first night of many. The stranger who found our light stayed 2 nights. His name was Henry, a widower who'd lost his job, then his home, and then his hope. He fixed the hinge on the classroom door before he left, and when I thanked him, he said, "It's easier to fix things when someone believes you can." That line stayed with me. It felt like something Daniel might have said. The kind of wisdom that comes too late to save yourself, but just in time to save someone else. By the next week, 2 more travelers came. A young woman escaping the cold with a sleeping child wrapped in a quilt. A man who said little but left the next morning with a smile. I'd seen only in students who'd finally learned to read. The word spread quietly. The school's light is on again. And soon, I didn't have to sweep the steps alone. Clara made a signboard for the front fence. Hand-painted stars and crooked letters that read, "Room with a light on. Open nights below freezing. Tea, bread, kindness. No questions? The town remembers. At first, people came out of curiosity. Old neighbors who'd once pitied me now brought firewood. The grocer left a crate of apples by the door. Someone, I never found out who, patched the hole in the roof with tin sheets under the cover of night. Gert from the diner started sending pies, wrapped in checkered cloth with notes that said, "For the room that remembers to be kind." Even the mayor stopped by one afternoon, hat in hand, cheeks red from the cold. "I heard rumors," he said with an awkward smile, "about a school that refuses to die." "It's not the school," I told him gently. "It's the people inside it." He looked around the hall, the chalkboard, the stove, the couches patched together with stubborn love. Then he nodded. "Then we'll make it official." By spring, a letter came. The old Ellery School is hereby designated a Heritage and Community Center in recognition of its continued service and the enduring kindness of those who keep its light on. I laughed when I read it. Enduring kindness, that's all it ever was. The last letter, one morning, as the snow began to melt into silver puddles, Clara came running from the mailbox, cheeks flushed. "Grandma, there's something for you." It was an envelope, no return address, postmarked weeks earlier. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful but trembling. Inside was a single folded sheet. "Mrs. Ellery, My name is Joseph. I worked at the warehouse where your son used to come on weekends. He talked about you all the time. The teacher who taught him how to make mistakes beautifully. A few months before he passed, he gave me this letter and asked me to send it when the snow returns. I forgot until now, when I saw your story in the paper. I hope it finds you warm. Joseph! My hands shook as I opened the second page. Daniel's handwriting. Mama, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home in time. I kept waiting for the right moment, but there's no such thing. There's only the door and the will to open it. I tried to live without shame, but shame lived with me instead. You were right. Love isn't something you earn. It's the roof that waits for you no matter how long the road is. Tell Clara I kept the key. Tell her she was the reason I never gave up looking for light in dark rooms. And if the world ever feels cold again, turn the stove on, even if only for one person. That's how warmth begins. I love you, Mama. Daniel. By the time I finished reading, Clara had her arms around me. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, two souls holding what was left of him. And somehow, it was enough. The living legacy. The seasons turned. Winter melted into a shy spring, and the schoolyard bloomed again with dandelions. Weeds. Yes, but the most hopeful kind. Children began to come back, this time not for lessons in grammar or sums, but for stories. Clara read to them every Sunday by the stove, her voice filling the air like birdsong. I sat by the window, knitting blankets for the visitors, pretending not to listen even as my heart swelled. One day she said, "We should name it something for them. For Dad. For Grandpa." I thought for a long while, tracing the worn edge of my cup. Then I smiled. "The room with a light on," I said. "That's already its name," she laughed softly. "Then we'll keep it." And so we did. The final winter years passed, though we barely noticed. My hair turned silver white. Clara grew into the woman her father would have been proud of. Strong, soft, unafraid of the past. The school stayed open every winter. Each year the town added a new coat of paint, a new window, a new story. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a promise. And one last winter, as snow began to fall outside the window once more, I felt my hands grow still around my knitting needles. The fire hummed low. The old clock ticked softly in the hall. I looked at Clara, who was writing by the stove, her hair glowing gold in the firelight. The sight filled me with peace so deep I could almost taste it. I whispered mostly to myself, "It's warm enough now." She looked up. "What did you say, Grandma?" I smiled. "Nothing, dear. Just thinking how beautiful it is." The sound of laughter again. She came and kissed my forehead, like she used to when she was small. "Go rest," she said gently. "I'll keep the light on." Epilogue. The light that stayed. They tell me she never let the fire go out. That every winter she reads my stories to the travelers who find their way through the snow. That she added one more line to the chalkboard beneath my old words. Be kind, always, and keep the light on. Someone's still finding their way home. And if the wind carries a whisper through the cracks in the school walls on cold nights, well, that's just me. Listening, smiling, still teaching in my own way.